In a risk communication effort, there are many types of information products that can be developed. These are associated with different channels of dissemination. The right tools or a combination of tools will depend on the topic, the available resources, and the objective. The basic categories to choose from include information materials, traditional and social media, technology-assisted communication, face-to-face communication, and consultation. Let's start with information materials. Things like information sheets, pamphlets, posters, web pages, they're well suited to disseminate relatively large quantities of risk information economically and to meet the needs of various segments of the intended audience. Posters are useful for raising awareness, for example. They can be placed in prominent spots where the audience lives, travels, works, or plays, like work cafeterias, or buses, or markets. They can also be placed strategically in locations that prompt people to change their behavior right there and then. This increases the prominence or salience of the risk by bringing it to people's attention at the moment that they take the decision. But posters tend to have only momentary salience. Once people step away from the visual prompt, they may not remember the information they just saw. Moreover, because people have limited attention and time to read and process it, posters might only include a selected amount of information. Embedding QR codes in posters and notices is one way to give interested members of the public links to more detailed information. If there's a lot of content, pamphlets might be a more feasible option. That allows for more detailed information to be included. And although online materials are increasingly replacing physical printed materials have the advantage of being retained and referred to whenever they're needed. One potential concern is that the look and feel of these information products may be similar to commercial advertisements. There's already so much advertising and visual clutter surrounding us, so having more printed material may fail to attract or even deter some of the target audience who may think, this is just more hype. If printed materials are overused, their impact then may be diluted and the materials ignored. Let's turn to traditional media. Traditional mass media, the newspapers, TV, and radio, can be very powerful channels. They reach large audiences, and they can be memorable and credible for many people. Risk communicators interact with the mass media through press releases, press briefings, and interviews with journalists. Despite their reach, though, working with the mass media is challenging. A key disadvantage is that the media channel often controls the content and the timing of the story. Because of time constraints and incentives at media outlets, stories on risk-related issues may not take the angle or provide the depth of information that the risk communicators intend. When a risk issue is currently of low salience to the public, it may be impossible to secure mainstream media coverage at all. On the other hand, the media can be relentless in their pursuit of a story on a particular topic, possibly exaggerating risks through sensationalizing them or the presentation of events that are partial or even inaccurate. Organizations therefore need to make continual efforts to develop and maintain mutually productive working relationships with reporters. Though this means significant time commitment, vigilantly contacting media representatives to update them on breaking news or to suggest story ideas at appropriate times, it may be worth the investment when it results in high-quality, committed media coverage. Let's turn now to social media. That refers to internet-based applications that allow people to create, exchange, and react to content. It therefore applies a degree of active participation, a hallmark that distinguishes social media from traditional media. We can think of social media as a form of multi-way communication, more like mingling at a party rather than listening to a lecture. It forms a complex information ecosystem characterized by transience and ambiguity. This in itself isn't a new phenomenon. Members of the public have always been engaged in an active process of search and selection of information that they believe to be relevant for them. But in an age of superabundant information, attention and time have become the limiting factors rather than access to information itself. So the filters which people use to identify valuable and trustworthy information become prominent. Social media is a prime site of information exchange on personal and sometimes sensitive issues like health or food safety. And so it's been used not just by agencies to impart risk information, but also by advocacy groups and companies seeking to exert influence, to recruit people to a cause or to sell a product or a service. This creates a crowded and potentially confusing information space. For a risk communicator, focusing on social media activity, such as generating traffic in shares and likes, doesn't necessarily achieve the objectives of risk communication, which we'll remember is to help people to take decisions to manage the risks they face. Nonetheless, social media holds a positive and an increasingly important role in spreading information or risks, especially in the context of disasters, such as wildfires or floods or earthquakes. Social media activity now follows extremely quickly after the onset of a disaster. People share information, offers of assistance, and calls for help on platforms like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. In many cases, social media has been valuable in identifying actual and potential victims, providing information to them on sources of help, evacuation routes, and connecting sources of assistance with those who need it. However, caution's needed. If citizens self-organize, there's a risk that misinformation or distrust of authorities may lead to people taking actions that actually increase their risks, like breaking quarantine or refusing to evacuate. Authorities need to be aware of the competing sources of information, work out who to cooperate with, who to refute, and who to ignore. Let's turn now to technology-assisted communication. New technologies provide exciting opportunities to communicate risk in engaging ways. Mixed reality, virtual reality, touch tables, apps. There have also been huge advances in bringing data analysis, visualizations, and simulations to members of the public. It can be apps and compelling visualization tools that grab attention and engage people while providing useful information to them. Data analysis tools can be made available on websites to allow those who are already engaged in a risk issue to find out more, without the need for the risk communicator to develop tailored information products for each segment of the audience. The costs of website and app development have come down, and the skills to build these are now more readily available. However, the time and the cost involved in developing an effective risk communication product of this kind remains high. Many rely on people finding their way to a website or to a gallery or a meeting, and having the time and level of interest to interrogate the data. Their impact on understanding, attitudes, and behaviors needs to be evaluated in a particular context before embarking on development. But these tools are likely to be most useful when the audience is already concerned about an issue and is actively engaged in information seeking. Let's turn now to face-to-face communications. If the objective of the communication effort is to get immediate feedback and to address the concerns of particular target groups, face-to-face communication may be your best choice. But care needs to be taken here too, as face-to-face messages can be misunderstood. Audiences may be too overwhelmed or hostile to ask questions that would clarify those misunderstandings. Particularly angry audiences can just refuse to listen and turn a presentation into a political forum. Advanced technical knowledge is usually necessary to present oral risk information with credibility. However, the ability to speak in a persuasive manner is also necessary. No matter how well-educated an expert, if he has trouble speaking before groups, then he'll be a poor choice for a spokesperson. On the flip side, a professional presenter with only superficial knowledge of the risk can be perceived as not being credible. However, the people within an organization who would be best suited to engage face-to-face with the public are often reluctant to do so, particularly on contentious issues where the audience is potentially hostile. The identification and preparation of the spokesperson is therefore a critical issue. Now let's take a look at stakeholder participation. That's key when a community needs to come to a collective decision, and all members need to accept that decision. For example, in relation to the siting of a waste facility. So going beyond a public meeting, there are many types of stakeholder participation that are relevant to risk communication. These include advisory committees, facilitated deliberation, alternative dispute resolution, focus groups, community-operated environmental monitoring, as well as formal hearings in which the audience is invited to give testimony. Stakeholder participation can be structured to accommodate a variety of audiences. There are several advantages. The audience can see for themselves exactly what's known about the risk, how the risk will be managed, and how decisions are reached. Depending on the nature of participation adopted, the audience can even be involved in the characterization of the risk. delineation of scenarios, information search, and in some cases give input towards the risk management decision. As a result, the decision is likely to be received with greater consensus. Stakeholder participation is demanding, of course, in terms of time and resources, and it requires a strong commitment on the part of those taking the risk decision to support and abide by the agreed process. Without this, participation can backfire, increasing mistrust and hostility and reducing the acceptability of any risk decision.